that time again. It's time for our weekly Stoic lesson, courtesy of our handbook for new Stoics. This week, we are on week 14. We're chugging along here, week 14, which talks about evaluating your goals. And as always, it's always such an interesting angle or approach that the authors take and how they tie very modern concepts to ancient Stoicism. Specifically, when they're talking about goals, is not, is it a SMART goal or is it a, but what is it, a push goal or whatever the kinds
are. Those corporate
are.
terms for goal setting?
Yes.
Okay, just check.
They're smart, they're smarter.
Oh.
Yes, there's, is it a, yeah, anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Or
and
how does
acronyms that
a
stand
vision
for
board?
Yeah, they do.
Yes.
Specific, measurable, achievable,
Action, yeah.
realistic, or actionable, realistic and time-based.
Yes.
Yes, but so we're not talking about SMART goals today, thank goodness. Instead, what they talk about is when it comes to setting your goals, or comes to setting, not even so much goals, but a behavior that you are going to engage in. You want to think about kind of two litmus tests when it comes to those that can be harmful. Goals that you aren't likely to succeed, that are not going to happen. And we'll dig into that a little bit more in a minute. But also goals that you will most likely regret if you do succeed, which was such an interesting angle to think about when it comes to evaluating your goals. Do I really want this or not? Or what will happen if I in fact get what I think I want? Will it be as great as I maybe imagined it? They talk about that we shouldn't labor for what is vain, or to achieve things that we are not able to obtain. This is on page 93. And really what they say here at the bottom is that the Stoics are simply advising us to calibrate our efforts to the likelihood of the results based on our best judgment of the likelihood. However, they added one great thing, which I absolutely loved, and I highlighted and circled and put a star on the top of page 94. And they said, there can be things where people talk about how they achieved the impossible. But if they achieved it, then it's not impossible.
Right.
It makes me think about the 5-minute mile, right? And how 4-minute mile, and how no one thought it was possible. It's impossible. No one can run 4 minutes, and someone did it. I mean, he worked really hard to do it. He actually had a whole team helping him, so several people actually ran the 4-minute mile. But the moment he did it, it all of a sudden became possible, and then people continually did it after him. So it's that whole idea of, when it comes to thinking about your goals, be careful what you think is impossible, because in truth, it could in fact become possible.
And the second part of that is almost like the be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
But that's the interesting part about this for me, is because the lessons are interesting in that it says, don't waste your time pursuing things you don't think are going to be worth it. But if you're looking at something you think is impossible and you make it possible, it's almost like this weird dichotomy of goal setting. Because it in a sense, I thought it was almost discouraging to shoot for the stars in some ways. So thinking it might be hard to get there, but people do it all the time. Literally shoot for the stars. That seemed like a crazy dream up until the 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
So for all of humanity, until they decided to have the space race, the Russians, Americans, John F. Kennedy saying, we choose to go to the moon and do these other things, not because they're easy, because they are hard. So without that sort of mindset mantra, it wouldn't have happened. So if he was a Stoic, would he have pursued that dream? Would he have said, let's go to the moon? But it was the way they asked the question too. It wasn't, can we go to the moon? Is, can we go to the moon and return a human safely back to Earth? Mm-hmm. So does that change the Stoic part of the goal?
I don't know.
Is that how you ask the question?
I will tell you, this exercise, I loved the idea of it, but it completely bummed me out.
That's what I mean. It was sort of like have a moderate level of goal, not a shoot to the moon kind of goal.
Yeah. Because mine, I was just like, Oh, okay. Maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I can't succeed at this. Like, it became more defeatist in my mind
Oh,
than
wow.
it didn't invigorate me, which is, yeah, surprising because I think that's not the intent here by any means.
Well, but I will say, I no, this is week 14, and if we've learned anything along the way, is that they're kind of taking us like a step at a time. So it could be that this is just a part of the process that they want you to kind of, yeah, you know, sometimes you have to like do the bummer part first before you like get up to the ascension. Is maybe this is just, it's just part of the process, and you've got to trust that they're going to bring us around in future weeks to where they want us to go.
But maybe that's exactly right, Sierra, in that as Rob Hunter or Amy Yak or Sierra Ram Cantrell, maybe we can't on our own go to the moon, without a team of help. So maybe the idea is later on down the line, there are certain goals you can have as a person, but there are certain goals you can have as a team. So, in NASA's case, you take all the smartest people that you can find, put them in a room and say, okay, how can we do this? Because if you sit there by yourself, you'd be like, okay, how do I build a rocket? How do I get enough fuel? What's the math? What's the likelihood? So on and so forth. So that
well,
could
like I learned this summer, we were in Huntsville, Alabama. We went to the Space and Rocket Museum, and actually a big part of the success of the moon was United States stole a guy that was a Nazi guy.
Yeah.
That had amazing knowledge, and they wouldn't have really gotten there without taking on that member of their team. There were actually lots of international members that they brought on. So, we think of it as a United States victory, but really the team expanded way beyond our borders as well. I like how you said that, because that's true. This is all just personal. This is each of us doing the exercise as us as a person. But maybe as we widen our scope, we understand that the team aspect of it.
Yeah.
Well, I'll give you an example of one of the ones I wrote. So I just picked a number. I said one of the goals, because they have you break it down into 5 questions.
Yes.
What did I spend significant time or energy pursuing is number 1. Why are you pursuing this? Number 2. On a scale of 0 to 100%, what are the chances if you continue putting energy into this pursuit, you will succeed consistently, and B, live a happy, satisfied life? That's number 3. Number 4, what are some ways in which you won't succeed consistently? And then number 5, we asked you another scale of 0 to 100%. Are you still confident that you'll succeed consistently and be satisfied if you keep pursuing this endeavor? So I picked a number for a net worth. I said 20 million, because I figured that you can basically do whatever you want if you have $20 million in net worth. You can work when you want, you can sleep when you want, you can go where you want.
You can give where you want.
Yes, exactly. So I kind of came up with 75% that I'm confident that consistently I could do that. But in that 4th question, I sort of wrote down, I don't need that money to be free. Now, sure, maybe some time constraints, but if I really wanted to, I could reevaluate how I spend my time, and I could work less and maybe make less, but I would still be free. So it was sort of just another way to look at what my actual goal was. It's not necessarily money-based. It is more of a free sort of mind-based.
Ah, what a great way to look at that. That's very insightful, because it's not that you said, oh, well, I don't know if this is going to happen now that I think about all the ways that it can't, that I couldn't achieve it. Instead, it caused you to pause and go, well, let me think about what's the real motivator? What's the real driver behind this goal that I'm setting? And then the goal itself can completely change based on that assessment. That's a great perspective on it. Like I said, I got real bummed out when I did it. So great job, Rob. Oh,
Rob Hunter gets the gold star this week.
Yeah.
Well, it's another example. So, I mean, this was the consistent part for me. So we want to remodel our house at some point. So we have these amazing mountain view. We just got lucky. The timing was great. And we had this debate. And Amy said one day, you imagine if we had a porch in the 2nd floor, because we don't have a 2nd floor. So you're a little bit more elevated and we can see mountains forever in the distance. And I said, I'm not necessarily worried about that, because I'm just enjoying what we have right now. And I wrote that too. I said, we could remodel the house, create the dream house, and I'm 85% sure that we can do that. But I'm not sure if it will actually add to my overall happiness, because I'm already happy with it. So that was just another way I kind of spun that. I'm like, so if it doesn't happen, am I going to be extremely disappointed? No, not really.
But does that then decrease or we
Could.
say let the air out of the tires that would propel you towards that goal?
Could.
See, and that's where I struggle with it because there's this idea of contentment like we had in our I think our last or the one prior where we were thinking about minimalism and not having more than you need and being content and satisfied with what you have because what you have is still far better than what you had in the past or what other people may have. But at the same time, that's where I was saying this really kind of bummed me out in some ways because it was like, well, maybe not. Well, maybe I shouldn't because, like, for me, a part of it was one of my big things was focusing on this business and PPS and, why am I doing it? And, my confidence level initially was okay. And then I went through, like, what's all the things that could prevent me from making it happen? And it just, it just kept going down. And at the end, I looked and went, well, shit, man. I don't know. Is this really worth pursuing? Is this the best pursuit of my time? Because of all these things that could go wrong. It is a bit of premeditatio malorum, which is good to try to find ways to overcome that barrier or that obstacle. But at the same time, I worry like,
But can you be happy with the work you've already done?
Yes,
regardless of outcome.
Absolutely. But again, then I agree with you, but then it becomes, well, then what are your goals, right? Are your goals always just being happy with what you have, or are your goals pushing to something that you haven't had and what might be considered, no, I won't say impossible, but,
I think the Stoic answer is both.
Yeah.
So I think I always go back to, even like we talked about with the minimalism unit, is useful or spark joy or both.
Yeah.
So there's the aspect which Amy, I think you're looking at it more on a result driven, right? Is that yes, if the result or the outcome that you desire, the goal for that. But I think to Rob's point of the money and the time, it's a balance of the two, because do you do it because you want it to be successful and have a good outcome and make money? Yes. But are you also doing it because it sparks joy or fulfills a passion or fulfills a sankopa, a greater meaning, a greater purpose to you? And I think if the answer to both was no, I think then you would definitely want to reevaluate the goals. Mm-hmm. And I think in any situation of life, a relationship, a business, anything, the scales tend to kind of do this throughout, and you're finding that balance. And sometimes it's more passion and less result, and sometimes it's this. But I think it's the intersection of both of those things. To Rob's point about the money and the time, is though they're both important. When the passion isn't there for either, then it's like, okay, do we need to scrap this goal and start over?
Like, be clear about what your motivation really is. Yeah. And that's a good way to reframe it. So how about you, Sierra? What were one or two of your goals that you evaluated?
Well, honestly, the biggest one this past week had to do with school, because it's kind of been all about in our life. So we were trying to make remote school work. And I wrote the 50%. I thought it was kind of like a 50-50. But then I recognized that so many of the aspects were not in our control as far as trying to make that model successful. We were trying to do remote school over the computer. And while I knew we had a chance of it, there was too many things out of our control. And then I also saw the passion or the spark of it be so low that really influenced. By the end of the week, I was down to a 2% chance that remote school on the computer could be successful.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I realized then it was a true labor in vain, that I would be throwing a lot of energy and time towards trying to make that work. And even if it worked, even if we quote unquote did it, the joy levels were so low, the passion levels were so low that I no longer wanted to achieve that goal. Then we went down the path, which is where we are now. We scrapped remote learning and we're doing homeschooling.
Mm-hmm.
And that being another piece of later on in the week is there's a lot more aspects that we can control, and there's a lot more joy in it. So even if we have small successes and small failures along the way, in the bigger picture, I felt like it was a higher percentage of succeeding in the goal of a great education for our kindergartner.
What a real world example that popped up at the right
They
time.
always seem to just come right when you need them, don't they? It's
Funny how they just the chapters just they just keep on coming.
And talk about making a difficult decision, right? I mean, it's in the middle of this pandemic where we're recording this, everything's changed. In particular, I don't think any state has a good answer as to go back to school, don't go back to school. Parents should have options, but what if none of the options are actually adequate for the children, you know, and it sucks the joy of learning. And then it forces you into that position as the parent whose sole mission is to make sure your child becomes an amazing adult, has to, on the fly, okay, now I have to become a teacher full time. And you have a teaching background, but still challenging in the sense that you have to abandon the model that as of 6 months ago was the model. And now lots of parents, I saw, I think a number in Arizona where we live in the Phoenix area, the number of people homeschooling their kids has tripled this year because of similar reasons. They didn't feel that schools met the challenge to teach online.
Yeah, and don't misunderstand. I just want to recognize that there's a lot of choices out there, and everybody makes their own choice based on their own circumstances. This is just what we felt strongly about working for us, and we have the luxury of being able to. I can be home with him. Mm-hmm. So whereas a lot of other parents, they don't have that choice because maybe both parents or the parent that's in charge has to work or has to be out of the home. So there's really no one great answer. It's right. Tough. You're just trying to like make the best of what you can. But we talk about this in our house all the time. We talk about just making the best of the situation and making the best of what we can and the things that are within our control. I've got a 5-year-old Stoic in my house. So.
Little Stoic in training, so I love it. Yeah, well, I mean, it really does. It's thinking about that obstacle to opportunity, and even, you know, in some ways, it's all the perspective of how you approach it. In some ways, you could say, you know what, to your point, 6 months ago, this would never, or it might have been a thought, but not really, and you would have gone the traditional route, and he would have gone to school in the traditional way. But because this has been introduced, this opportunity has presented itself, and you know, it may create a whole different educational experience for him because of it, the way he learns. So, you know, as Whitney Houston says,
oh boy,
the children are our future, so teach them well and let them lead the way.
For those of you in the audience, Whitney Houston is very special to Rob and Amy. I know Amy really loves Whitney, but also their first dance at their wedding was indeed a Whitney song.
Yes, it was. Our song is a Whitney song.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Not that one.
not Wind Beneath My Wings.
The greatest love of all. Yeah, not the greatest love of all.
Okay.
But I think, you know, another thing that, as you were talking, that I specifically wrote down that I want to call out is that the way you approached your goals and the way each of us should approach it, and now I'm going to reevaluate my goals and have a different perspective here, is really thinking about making sure that your goals are within your control. And I also wrote, and bring joy. You know, I think those are the two things, because the thing that bummed me out some of it was in my control, but some of it was not. And I think that's part of what caused me to feel a little deflated or defeated in the goal that I had set. So it's focusing on the aspects of the goal that you can control, which is the way you approach it, right? We always talk about, you know, outcome versus activity. And I think that's key to point out here, because I don't think they specifically pointed it out even in the lesson, but really thinking about when it comes to your goals, what do you have control over? and framing them in that regard, so that way you feel that you can be successful.
The dichotomy of control keeps coming up, huh?
Son of a gun. Mm-hmm.
For more on that,
Always
check out
there.
Sarah's course, by
Yeah.
the way.
Check out Radical Mindfulness.
Mhm.
Yep, it's
Yep.
there. It's
Yeah.
there, and it'll be in all of our courses, I'm sure, as we revisit the
Oh.
concept, because it's a good touchstone, though, because there's the philosophy, and the reason why the Stoics are the philosophy of the real world is it's not just the philosophy, it's not just an idea. It's that how do you actually apply it when it comes to day by day, when shit hits the fan, when stuff goes wrong. I always said when I was teaching meditation techniques to people, remember when we used to like teach things like person to person in the same room? Remember that? I always used to say, it's easy to meditate and be peaceful when you're in a beautiful spa, right? When you smell eucalyptus and there's no cell phone going off and everything is serene, and when you're on a movie set, right? When it's a controlled environment, that's the easiest time to meditate. But when you need to know how to meditate and be mindful is when it's the opposite. When everything's going wrong, when you just dropped the bag of groceries, when the refrigerator just stopped working right after you got back from the grocery store. I mean, that's when you need to have these tools in your toolbox, is when things are imperfect, unplanned. So that dichotomy of control always touches us back to being able to come back to the reasonable. Yeah, it sucks. It does. But okay, let's break it down. What are we in control of? Break it down to what can we control? How can we move forward?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of just standing with a rotting pile of groceries.
And it's not supposed to be easy. And they point that out too, because those life situations where you have the 5 things at once, and it says even in here, you'll be hard pressed to find a philosophy or a religion that isn't ethically demanding. But that's the point. In and of itself, it's a goal. It's a goal of pursuit. And that's what goals are. They're constant pursuits. So in this case, if it is about being more focusing on what you can control, okay, you dropped the groceries. It already happened. Now what can you control? You can control how you react to that. You can control, all right, I'm going to go get the orange that's rolling down the street. The fridge, okay, do I know how to fix it? No? Okay, who can I call that can? That's the point is, it's always to be going towards something. In this case, in the Stoicism, being virtuous, which is morally high elevation morally, and that's the point. How you treat others, how you treat yourself, importantly, and that's why I think that in talking about this, none of this is supposed to be easy, because we have chosen to focus our attention on something that is challenging. Mm-hmm. But we're better for that, because it's not always taking the easy way.
Right. Well, I would say thank you guys. You both gave me such a better, fresher perspective on this lesson, because I knew that I was presenting and I was like, this, like I said, it bums me out. But now I have I'm going to look at my goals fresh and think about the number one for things that I can control and or that bring me joy, which hopefully it's both. But also thinking about and reevaluating the goal itself, and really taking that step back and reassessing what is the real goal, what is the baseline or the driver behind that goal, the deeper why, because then the goal itself might shift.
Well, I circled here on page 97. The goal is to help you figure this out for yourself by taking a closer look at how you spend your time and energy. Mm-hmm. And I circled that a couple times because it's a little confusing, because there's the goal, but how you spend your time and energy is really what they want us to look at. And are we chasing things that we don't want, or that that just aren't going to work? So it's good, and I feel like this week would be a great touchstone to do again. I hope maybe later they give it to us again later.
Probably bear a little more.
Yeah, they're going to ask us to do harder stuff next time.
Yeah, right?
Oh yes, it's definitely going to get harder, I have no doubt. But that's the beauty of it.
And that's how they
If
break
given
it up.
a choice, would you rather lose a finger or a toe?
Yeah.
Mhm. Great question. Depends on which finger and which toe, I
Yeah.
suppose, if I get to choose.
I don't know if you get to choose.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
You just have to roll the dice.
Yep.
All right, wonderful. Well, fantastic. Thank you both so much for your fresh perspective on this. I find that I got a lot out of it. I hope that those of you that are
Mhm.
watching did as well, and you may consider revisiting this exercise too if you experienced the way I felt, where I got really bummed, or maybe had a fresh perspective and reevaluation like Rob, or really focused on what it is that you can control and where you're spending your time and energy like Sierra did. So we'd love for you to join us on the porch as part of our virtual book club. You can find a link to join the group down below here in this video, and there's also a link where you can get the book and follow along, or we would love to hear your comments, your insights, your ahas as well. Your perspectives are valuable. Just as we saw today, having 3 different ways of approaching this can really help when it comes to helping to continue this practice of becoming better, virtuous people in a world that is outside of our control, for sure. All right, so next week, we have week 15. Rob, I think that's you, right?
Remind yourself of impermanence. Sounds heavy.
Oh,
Does sound kind of heavy.
yeah.
I think Rob's the perfect person to take this on because I feel like he could give us a little levity to the situation.
Interesting.
All right. Wonderful.
Challenge accepted.
Well, until next week, thank you so much for joining us. Continue living virtuously. Continue focusing on what is within your control and what sparks joy for you. Thanks.